Thanks so much for joining us, and everyone who's on the actual Zoom for joining us. We have a very, very cool panel coming up, and I'm super excited. We have four really, just really great speakers, all of whom are important to me in my personal lives and I've had relationships with. So I'm excited to, oh, Adam's here, great, to hear you guys all talk. And just before we get started, I want to plug a few things with the conference. This will be the last panel for today, but just to keep in mind, we have 4 more days of really awesome panels, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Monday next week. And then this evening also at 5:30 Eastern time, there will be and I think Jesse just put it in the chat for those on the Zoom, there'll be a workshop around talks of the Lubavitch Rebbe and what Hasidus has to say about environmentalism. So if you're interested in joining that, you can email the director email in the chat, which is director@spiritualityandsociety.org, and we can join you to that. That'll be co-run with New Voices magazine. And besides that, I think we're ready to get going. So we'll jump right in because we have four presenters today. So first will be Ellen Bernstein, and Ellen founded the first national Jewish environmental organization, Shomrei Adamah, 33 years ago. She's the author of numerous books on Judaism and ecology, including The Splendor of Creation and The Promise of the Land, a Passover Haggadah. She also created the first ecologically centered Tu Bishvat Seder, rooted in the original Kabbalistic Seder. Today, Ellen continues to write and teach on the intersection of Judaism, Bible, and ecology, and is an advisor to the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. Please take it away, Ellen.
Thanks, Jonah. Hi, everybody, and thanks so much to Jonah and Jesse and Philip. And and I'm sure the other panelists are especially grateful to you that you've expanded the teaching on Judaism and ecology this time to a full day session for the conference. So thank you so much for that. As I had mentioned in our last time together, what moves me the most about the Rebbe's life is his work in the public sphere. I don't know many Jewish leaders who devote themselves to work in the public domain, and it's very comforting to me to know that the Rebbe did, since this is the place where I've centered my own work in Judaism and ecology. There's so much to say about why this orientation is so important, especially today, but I'll leave that conversation for the discussion period should others want to explore this further. For now, I'm going to address my comments to 2 specific topics. First, since Tu B'Shvat, the Jewish New Year of the Trees, is just on the horizon, and since our conference is particularly interested in mysticism and Tu B'Shvat is rooted in mysticism, I want to devote most of my time to the discussion of this holiday. Tu B'Shvat has also been central to my work over the last 33 years, both for its ecological aspects and for its opportunities to bring Jewish ecological ideas to a wide public. Second, I'll address ways in which I feel the Jewish world needs to grow in order to deepen its own environmental thinking and practices. Let me begin with a bit of context. What drew me back to Judaism as a young adult were the Jewish holidays. When I first rediscovered Judaism, I couldn't believe how much fun the holidays were. As a child growing up, I had had no positive experience of Judaism or the festivals and thought of them as solemn or boring occasions. Over time and with study and experience, I came to see that the holidays mark the seasons, the joy of rain in its proper time, the ingathering of the harvest, and the birthing of lands, long before they were associated with Jewish history. While I was exploring the ecological meaning of my own tradition's holidays, I was learning from the work of environmental artist Chris Wells about how festivals, and in particular pageants and parades, could delight and engage people in the restoration of the earth. I began to see the Jewish holidays in a new light and realized they could also function as organizing nodes throughout the year to both build community and inspire and enlist people in the care for our earthy home. Tu B'Shvat, the Jewish New Year for the trees, was the most obvious Jewish holiday for engaging communities in environmental care and environmental justice. Tu B'Shvat is not just a festival of the trees, it's a celebration of the ultimate tree, the tree of life, and the whole natural world. And because it has no set liturgy, there's tremendous latitude for creative expression. The Kabbalists, the mystics who first took this holiday both seriously and lightheartedly, developed a colorful and flavorful Seder for it, a ritual fruit feast celebrating the exquisite diversity of creation. They celebrated by blessing and eating fruits with and without shells, drinking color-coded wine concoctions, and reading passages about the creation and the whole natural world. They viewed reality in terms of 4 levels or 4 worlds: Asiya, Yetzira, Bria, Atzilut, or doing, feeling, thinking, and spirit. These 4 worlds translate naturally to the 4 elements of earth, water, air, and fire. The Tu B'Shvat Seder is a playful, and as one of my students would affectionately say, bizarre holiday, but bizarre in the best kind of way. The point of the Seder, besides celebrating the diversity of the creation, is to bless the world. The more fruits we eat, the more we are required to bless. For the Kabbalists, blessing is an act of tikkun olam, of fixing the world. Nature's well-being depends in part on our kavanot, the intentions we hold in our hearts and express through our blessings before partaking of nature's bounty. The Kabbalists understood that whenever we take a fruit from a tree without blessing it, we're depleting the tree of its life-sustaining energy. When we offer a blessing, we can restore the energy and complete the cycle. The earth gives to us, and we give back to the earth, and so we live in continuous reciprocity with the earth and her creatures. When we neglect the blessings, we are, the Talmud tells us, like robbers, stealing the divine energy from the plant. Blessings can also help us to shape our values. When we bless with intention, we train ourselves to appreciate the gift, the bread, the wine, the rain that we have been given. Most of us take nature for granted. We live lives of thoughtless consuming. We live in a state of forgetting. It requires a tremendous amount of focus to remember that the earth and her inhabitants are living generative beings, and that nature is a gift, and that our actions towards her matter. Blessings afford us a spiritual practice that can help us to wake up and actively care for nature as we care for ourselves. In my own work developing the first ecologically centered Tu B'Shvat Seder 33 years ago, I sought to create a heart-opening festival filled with art and music that was inviting to everyone, regardless of religious background. I've always been motivated to positioning Jewish ideas in the marketplace of ideas. And the very first Tu B'Shvat Seder took place in one of Philadelphia's beloved boathouses on the banks of the Schuylkill River and was co-sponsored by the Philadelphia Parks Department. We created a beautiful space for the Seder, decorated with living trees and life-size puppets that honored the elements. Song and dance, nature-centered poetry, and ecological readings brought the biblical and Kabbalistic texts of the original Tu B'Shvat Seder to life. Set in this context, Tu B'Shvat is completely fun and irresistible. I refer you to the link of the video of my Seder that I've been running for the last 3 decades that's in the chat. Creating vivid and life-affirming experiences of the natural world always seemed to me the most compelling way to engage people in the care of nature. People are much more responsive to positive celebratory messages than they are to moralistic, punitive ones. Significantly, Tu B'Shvat Seders offer a joyful way of building community across a political divide, which actually may be one of the most important things we must do if we really hope to help the earth restore herself. Our Jewish holidays are like gems that sparkle at precise moments during the seasonal cycle and brighten up the year, creating joy and connecting us to each other and the natural world. We, all of us, all peoples, regardless of background, need holidays, time to rest, reflect, wonder, build community, and remember what we're doing here on this earth. We can't just keep pushing and depleting ourselves. This will only lead to despair and burnout, climate fatigue. Taking care of the earth requires taking care of ourselves, and holidays give us the space to do that. And to reiterate, I believe that the Jewish practice of holidays can benefit many peoples, not just those who are Jewish, as we endeavor to help the earth regain a state of healthy balance. I want to devote my last minute or so to discussing what I think is needed in the Jewish world today. But first, let me say that we all owe a great debt of gratitude to Adam Berman here today and Shomrei Adamah for the spectacular work of Adamah and Urban Adamah. I believe that the Jewish farming movement is the most exciting and hopeful development in the Jewish community today. Abundance Farm, the farm at the synagogue where I live in Northampton, Mass, grows tons of food, feeds those in need, protects the soil and sequesters carbon, engages hundreds of unaffiliated Jews in Jewish life and care for the earth. The synagogue is so much more robust, filled with crowds of children frolicking in our gardens since the farm was introduced. It models what it means to be a religious community in the 21st century. On the other hand, what has been very disappointing to me is the lack of any kind of program in Judaism and ecology at the university and rabbinical school level. Environment is often framed as the cause du jour in established Jewish life, one of a litany of issues that good people must attend to. Environment, climate, the earth, these categories have not been of central concern in the Jewish world. And yet the environmental crisis is the greatest existential threat facing humanity. The land, the earth, is the source of our life and the length of our days. The field of Judaism and ecology needs to deepen. Religious leaders need to learn how to integrate ecological thinking and practice into every aspect of religious life, into the center of religious life, not the periphery. For decades, I tried to find a Jewish institution that would host a master's program in Judaism and ecology, but there were no takers. Meanwhile, in environmental studies classes all over the world, students are still being taught that Genesis 1:28, the now infamous verse that gives humanity dominion over the earth and its creatures, is responsible for our climate crises. This kind of simplistic and misguided reading of the text sows seeds of distrust towards Judaism and Christianity and deepens the secular and religious divide. We will never restore our earth until religious and secular, conservative and liberal work together for the common purpose of the future of life on this planet. Judaism has an authentic eco-theology, but it must be developed. We need some kind of center, perhaps an academic institution, perhaps a PhD program to foster the work, a space for people to come together and develop ideas, to share and grow in reciprocal relationship, a space for students and religious leaders to learn and to develop the field into a serious discipline, a space to nurture the interconnections that we all know are needed for all life to survive and thrive. There are so many ways in which scholars in the academy could help advance these ideas and possibilities, and I hope that over the course of this conference, we'll have the opportunity to explore this further. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That was amazing. And there's so much that I want to echo, but let's keep pushing forward so we can hear everyone's voices. Our next speaker is Dr. Ariel Evan Mayse, who joined the faculty at Stanford University in 2017 as an assistant professor in the Department of Religious Studies and serves as the rabbi in residence at Atik Jewish Maker Institute. He's the author of several books on Hasidism and Neo-Hasidism, including the 2-volume A New Hasidism Roots and Branches that was published by the Jewish Publication Society in 2019. I'm just going to hand it right over to you, Ariel.
Thank you. And thank you to the conference organizers. I begin today with a land acknowledgement that I'm coming to you from Berkeley, the historical lands of the Muekwa Ohlone tribes who have lived in community with this region for many, many centuries. Ellen, you've thrown down a challenge in a certain sense. We know that academia offers a lot of wonderful things, conversation partners within the humanities and beyond, expansion of knowledge together with depth. Many years ago, a friend and teacher of mine, Menachem Loberbaum, wrote an article about the difference between a Rav, a rabbi who has to decide the Psak Halacha, and a Talmid Chacham. And his argument in that piece was that the job of the rabbi, of the Rav, is that they have to make really tough decisions and figure out what to do. But a Talmid Chacham is there to change the way that people think about things. And in a certain sense, academia is meant to do that, not only to create policy, but to change narratives, to change modes of being, to change modes of thinking. And it does so together with rigor, commitment to disciplinarity, and also moving beyond it with the methods and refined thought that academic sciences have given us. On the other hand, not just in ecology and environmental studies, but all throughout the humanities, we've ceded so much ground that we've become irrelevant. We're afraid of the constructive dimension of what our projects may look like. As Lisa Sedaris has written in a recent book, we've given up the sacred, we've given up the narratives to the worlds of STEM. It doesn't mean that there isn't what to be learned from them. A tremendous amount can happen, but there are fundamental questions that the humanities can answer, or at least give us the formulation for that question. What does it mean to be a human being? And what does it mean to be a human being within this world? So as a religious person, I come to these questions from a religious perspective. The questions of environmentalism and ecology don't come from me just from the worlds of environmental studies. But I'm profoundly uninterested in the keywords approach to environmental ethics, looking into Jewish texts to find where can we see what everyone else is doing also in our tradition. Oh yes, we have that too. Why? Because religion is not just important because it's motivating for people, or because there are a lot of religious people in this world, or because religions are transnational and therefore they're really good at getting people to do things. Religion shapes the way we think. As Mary Evelyn Tucker notes, the ecological crisis is also a crisis of culture and of the human spirit. That's a part of what religion has to offer. Religions are ways of doing and ways of knowing that offer us alternatives to carbon capitalism, to technological determinism, or the notion that technological capacities should define our values. They offer us alternatives to the instrumental or extractive reason in which we are always the subject and the world around us is always the object. And they offer us a compelling alternative to the idea of the individual moral journey as the paragon of ethical development. But in order to find that, that means looking to the unique, distinctive voice of each tradition. In Judaism, that means taking seriously the realm of halacha. As the Lubavitcher Rebbe often quoted, Lo hamidrash ha'ikar ela ha'ma'aseh. It's not only, or perhaps not primarily, about the way we think, but also, and primarily indeed, about the way that we move in this world. And in Judaism, the world of ritual, the world of halacha, is the way in which we find the most robust entanglement of normative and applied ethics with action and concerns of practice. Halacha shapes the human life and helps us to rise above self-interest, giving us an embodied ethical prompting of mind, heart, and physicality. Halacha is in a certain sense where theology touches down, where heaven and earth can be stitched together as we think about what kind of world would the divine have us create and become co-creators with. And radiating outward, halacha is a voice from the Jewish tradition with much to offer outside of the Jewish tradition. But halacha never exists on its own or in a vacuum. We need the Agadah to infuse it, to steer it, to shape it, to transform it. That means theology, that means narratives, that means legends, that means a whole cluster of things that can help us understand the way in which these jurisprudential values are meant to be manifest. The spiritual vision of the Lubavitcher Rebbe is an important part of that story. And here I'd highlight his theory of divine immanence, very much in keeping with the Hasidic message in which the world shimmers with divine presence. God's infinite divine is manifest not only through the heavens, but through the quotidian, through the ordinary, through the flowers, through the trees, through every dimension of our world. That forces us into a philosophical position in which, if there is a distinction between the human and the natural world and the human and the animal, those distinctions are not ontological binaries in which we are always the subject and they are always the object. And if we take seriously this notion of we are here in order to create a dwelling place below, that project of presence is up to us. So as an experiment some years ago, I outlined some basic thoughts about what an environmental implication of the categories of Jewish tort law might look like. In Hebrew, that's called the world of Hilchot Nezikin, which is in some ways the bread and butter of traditional Jewish study, often in a very abstract form. I'm interested not only in the sense of what do these sort of conceptual categories tell us, but I'm interested in the way in which they can be put to work to fill in the gaps and also to provide a motivating force for a jurisprudential system in the West, where we have neither the vocabulary nor the values to protect the world in the way that it needs. The first category that you find, and I'll give 3 examples of this just in short, is this rabbinic notion of fire, or Eish, which is any property that becomes a damage-causing agent when it's mobilized by an external force, like wind, or it spreads on its own. One is obligated for the foreseeable damage that one causes to persons or property, and this fire is likened to an arrow shot from a bow. If the containment structure is unrepaired or insufficient, one is still obligated. Fire started by people and exacerbated by negligence, one must make restitution for this. This provides a powerful and interesting and indeed a capacious category for thinking about modern environmental pollutants, toxic chemicals, agricultural pesticides, radiation, asbestos, and so on. The second is pit or bore. Objects that sit in one place or are set in motion and become stationary again. That then cause damage to one who encounters them.
Looks like we're losing Ariel a little bit. Can you hear us, Ariel? Ooh. This is the world of Zoom that we live in these days. We'll give it a second longer and hopefully he comes back. If not, we can jump to Janna, and then when he comes back, he can finish up his talk. We'll just give it another second. Oh, I see. It looks like he's joining from a different computer. Hey, Ariel, can you hear us? Sorry about this, everyone.
Has it come back yet, Jonah?
Oh, I think I can hear you now. Yeah. Can you say hello? You're pretty low.
Hello. I'm going to stop my video.
Okay. Yeah, try that.
We're experiencing some difficulties in our neighborhood today. Great.
Thanks.
So the second category of pit or bore affords us a way of thinking about objects that sit in one place and provide cumulative damage. The Talmud gives an example of a pit that is 10 tfachim, or 10 hands breadths, which causes death, that's dug underneath another pit with 10 tfachim, and another pit like that. And in the case like that, everyone is obligated to pay. But what's so interesting is that it also provides a language for the tipping point. It describes a 9 hands breadth pit in which there's 1 hands breadth pit dug at the very bottom. And it asks the question, who's obligated to pay for this? And the answer is the person who dug the last one, the person who pitched it over, the person who didn't allow that healing to take place. This also covers questions of flushing out hazardous runoff, oil spills, ruinous forces that destroy property, both common and private. I would include in this Superfund sites and other kinds of toxic waste. And the third category of damages that has so much to share is the laws of neighborly relations, or Hilchot Shchenim, the calculus of how people must live together, including corrosive industries that must be distanced from private and public property, smoke, latrines, water pollutants, or other kinds of odors. The Talmud relates that one cannot simply claim to be doing something on one's own property. One, as it is likened to someone who shoots arrows from one property to another. One must make restitution for any and all damage. Moreover, the overarching ethos of responsibility that one finds in all of these cases means that the gaps that in tort law are significantly reduced. This is something that is a major, major question in American Jewish prudence, the gap of responsibility. In tort law, something can be forbidden even if it's not an actionable tort, and something can be inactionable even though it is morally reprehensible. Jewish law speaks, however, as a language of specifics, of liability, of obligation, of appreciation, and of knowing that we are working in harmony with a divine presence, in thinking as to how we make restitution for our actions and our non-actions, in terms of embracing the fact that human agency shapes our world in unprecedented ways, and it provides us a language for taking responsibility for that power and then moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ariel. That was beautiful. And I'm sorry we had some technical difficulties, but I'm glad you got to finish. We'll move right along to our next speaker, Janna Siller, who is the farm director at Adamah, a program of Hazon. Janna maintains the farm fields as space for growing food regeneratively, gathering vibrant and evolving Jewish community, exploring the role of soil in our sustenance, and leaning on the wisdom of literal and ancestral roots as we build toward climate justice and resilience. Janna facilitates learning among the Adamah community on topics of gardening, policy, climate, food systems, identity, ritual, and community life. Please take it away, Janna.
Thank you, Jonah, and thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be with these fellow panelists, and this is an exciting conference. So to introduce myself, I'm a farmer, and I live in Northwest Connecticut at Adamah. We grow vegetables. It's a real production farm. We grow thousands of pounds of food for customers and for hunger relief organizations like food pantries. We have a range of other crops growing as well, fruit, nuts, herbs. We have chickens and goats. And we're a Jewish farm because we host the Adamah Fellowship, a residential program where young Jews pray, learn, work, and live in community. We're a Jewish farm because we observe Shabbat and we use Jewish texts to inspire our growing practices, because we say Shehechianu together when the first tomato of the season ripens. We're a Jewish farm because you can hear folks singing from liturgy in the fields. But most essentially, we're a Jewish farm simply because we are a farm where Jews grow food. I'd like to focus today on the word that the authors of Social Vision chose to represent the ideas of the book, interconnectedness. Interconnectedness.net identifies where the conference can be found within the wilderness of the World Wide Web. And this word is very well suited to that heavy lift and holy work. And I'd like to open it up further here. Farming happens at our intersections with other species. It necessitates choices about how we will interact with the more than human world, plants, animals, microbes in the soil, the air itself, as well as the human world around the most crucial aspect of our existence, food. Farmers talk about their markets. Do we sell wholesale, direct to consumer, increasingly now e-commerce? And when they do, they're talking about whose life will continue into the next day thanks to their work. And farmers talk about management decisions, the nutrient analysis of different fertilizers, various grades of plastic for irrigation tubing, free-range pasture versus confined animal feed operations, And when they do, they're talking about negotiating with humanity's co-inhabitants on planet Earth, and indeed with the systems and cycles of our home itself. Personally, that's why I'm a farmer. I like having my back up against the wall and needing to make these most existential of choices. I like that in order to sweeten my food, I had to have drilled a hole into the trunk of a maple tree to divert some of its sugars into a sap collection bucket. And I need to have avoided drilling too deep or too many holes in order to ensure that the tree lives into another season to give sap again next year. When I commit acts of violence, like killing weeds or trapping groundhogs or yanking potatoes off of a plant, here's a reminder of the more than human world, if you can hear my cat meowing. I feel more appropriately responsible than I do when I purchase a potato on whose behalf violence has occurred in some unknown location and in some unknown and potentially more draconian manner. Growing a potato well is an act of love for the people who will nourish themselves with it, and it visibilizes interconnectedness in ways that are too few in modern life. In the Adamah Fellowship, we see that I am not alone in this desire to do this work, and I'm not alone in my desire to do it in Jewish community. Folks come to us craving intimacy with the sources of sustenance and with the kinds of questions of reciprocity discussed in the Social Vision book. These seekers are not simply interested in understanding interconnectedness as theology, although there is certainly a hunger for a deeper Jewish ecological theology, as Ellen spoke of. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the rabbinical students among our alumni say, I want to start a yeshiva on a farm. I want to study text in between planting and harvesting. But most of the folks who come to us are critically interested in understanding interconnectedness as lived experience. I believe that the Kabbalists too sought to live out these same embodied, personal, collective manifestations of the most essential questions. The Tu Bishvat Seder is a prime example, and the ways that Ellen has brought it to the ecological world and the resonance that it's taken are evidence. The Tu Bishvat Seder is an offering from the Jewish mystical tradition for us to connect to the divine via our connections to the world. The nuts, the fruits, the yeasts that have fermented the wine, and if you're attending the types of interpretive New England Seders that I do, tea leaves harvested from hemlock trees in the forest outside. The twin crises of our very current moment, both equally pressing, of the coronavirus pandemic and climate change, have laid bare the reality that we are biological creatures inextricably linked to one another and to the more than human world. We are a part of a global system of life. We are one part of the carbon cycle, a very heavy-handed part to be sure, but just one part. Understanding this allows us to reorient our relationship to carbon and our choice of where to put our share of it, the ground or the sky. We are not one thing with nature being another. We are within creation and we have choices to make about our role. The question of interpreting Breshit 1:28, does it confer to humans dominion over Earth, or is that a misreading, is a critical one, but it's not one that's holding back the tide of young Jews finding comfort and inspiration in Jewish life on land. Last weekend and next, there's a Jewish Farmer Network gathering, the second annual, in which folks with dirt under their fingernails are studying an ancient debate about eating pickles in the Shemitah year. They're discussing how to save their own seeds from last year's crop, and they're quoting the Sefer Yetzirah as they do it. The end is wedged in the beginning, and the beginning is wedged in the end. They're learning about agroforestry, and they are waking up together to chant Modeh Ani over Zoom. Like Rabbi Schneerson, their deep yearning to shine a light on the ways that our actions or inactions ripple out into the world finds solace in ancient ritual and text and debate. But also, like the Rebbe, they also find what they are looking for by engaging in national and global scale questions. While I'm never one to underestimate the transformative power of growing potatoes or of pouring red wine into white to meditate on the relationship between the realms of formation and action, we are missing the point if we come to believe that simply through individual acts of food production or community ritual, we will be able to live into our interconnectedness adequately. Social Vision reproduces Rabbi Schneerson's words. The blessing of the sun reminds us again and with additional emphasis that we have an open and clear path, precisely that which has already been initiated in other countries and in this country too, albeit in the smallest possible mode, to utilize the sun of which it is written, nothing is hidden from its heat, Psalms 19:7, that it should become the driving force for the supply of requisite energy and power. Rabbi Schneerson said these words in 1981 at a time when a flurry of laws had been passed in the previous decade in response to a very public reckoning with how our modern lives were affecting the world. The Cuyahoga River on fire and a massive oil spill on the Santa Barbara coast played out on TV screens everywhere. And in what seems to us now, in this time of legislative obstruction like a miracle, the Clean Water Act was passed, the Endangered Species Act was passed, and so on. In our time, many of us are opening our ears to hear the consensus among scientists that we need to halve our carbon emissions by 2030. And many of us, like Schneerson did in his time, are making our voices heard accordingly. Today, many of us are also opening our ears to old information that is moving closer to the forefront of national attention. Our home, the land where our houses sit and where Adamah fellows plant and dig potatoes, the place that Rabbi Schneerson escaped to from the Nazis in 1941, is only available to us because it was violently stolen from its indigenous inhabitants and developed into a wealthy nation by the use of slave labor and ongoing systemic racism. If that isn't a handful for the socio-mystical scholars to reconcile, I'm not sure what is. Rabbi Schneerson's teaching hold an insight that can help us unite and grapple with these two heartbreaking realities that so many of us are finally letting in. The book Social Vision states, Schneerson's concept of reciprocity reverses the normative concept of who plays the role of giver and receiver in a charitable exchange. The concept of reciprocity does not merely concern monetary or economic exchange, but also spiritual, intellectual, and emotional interchange as well. Righteousness alone does not compel us to end the wrongs of environmental injustice, poverty, cultural erasure, and racism. Our own need of one another, our interconnectedness does. We cannot meet the crises we face today if some of the voices needed to generate solutions are silenced. Here's an example. Native American indigenous wisdom about the interconnectedness of plant communities, long trivialized by science, is being confirmed by new research that shows mycorrhizal fungi connecting plants underground, providing highways on which nutrients and water and information are exchanged. This key insight has dramatic ramifications for how I and my colleagues on thousands of acres in Idaho can and should grow potatoes without releasing too much carbon into the atmosphere. Thus, we see a nested relevance of the word reciprocity. First, that reciprocity plays a role in plant and animal survival rather than simple competition. And second, that the diverse knowledges of humanity, past and present, set free to be useful only when poverty and repression are addressed, are integral to finding solutions for the future. In this way, we at Adamah do not see the food we grow for low-income communities as charity. Rather, we see that our futures are bound up in the futures of everyone, that we can use our access to land and seeds and a greenhouse and goat manure to grow food for a child who does not live near a grocery store. And perhaps she will, in time, be the one to develop a vaccine for the next virus, and so on. Social Vision tells us that upon writing a pamphlet on the necessity of moving towards solar energy, Rabbi Schneerson gathered a large crowd to recite the liturgy with him, and the ceremony took the form of an outdoor Farbrengen, which he led from a raised platform under a brilliant blue sky and shining sun. And so we learn from this Rebbe, reveling with his community of chassids, that experiencing the world invites us toward reciprocity by exposing the nodes of the web that ties us together. At the same time, he teaches that the process does not have to be drudgery or austerity or perfectionism based in shame or fear. It can be fun. We can be joyous as we lean into the hard and wonderful truth of our interconnectedness.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah, I see Ellen clapping. I agree. That was quite beautiful. Thank you. We'll have one more speaker and then we'll have time. I just want to remind everyone watching there's a Q&A section. So please, we won't have that much time for questions afterwards, but please put your questions in and we'll try to address as many as we can. And the last speaker is Adam Berman, who is Urban Adamah's president and founding executive director. And before founding Urban Adamah in 2010, he served as the executive director Isabella Freeman Jewish Retreat Center from 2002 to 2009, where he founded Adamah, the Jewish Environmental Fellowship, a 3-month leadership training program for Jewish young adults that integrates Jewish learning with sustainable ecological practices. And before Adam speaks, I'll just say I'm an alumni of Urban Adamah, and this man is one of the reasons why I have continued in learning more about Judaism and the reason that I have this job today, probably. So I owe him a personal debt of gratitude. And without further ado, Adam, please take it away.
Thank you, Jonah. It feels like a real honor to be in this conference and to be on this panel. Ellen, it's great to see you. I've known Ellen longer than anybody on this panel, and almost any friend in my life I've known Ellen.
Sorry, Adam, could you speak a little bit closer to the microphone so we can hear you?
Yeah, does that make a difference?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
So, as Ellen thanked Shamu and I for, doing the work that we do on our respective coasts, I'd like everybody to know, especially if you haven't been around this field for very long, that without Ellen and her groundbreaking work in the 90s, I certainly wouldn't be doing what I have done for the last 20 years. And in some ways, you presented to me as a 20-something a way of thinking about this tradition that I've inherited that spoke to my heart in a way that until that moment, nothing ever had. So I just feel incredibly grateful for you, and I love it in the rare moments when we get to hang out, even if it's virtually. So thank you for all that you've given to me personally and to this world. I'm thinking, as I'm listening to everybody speaking, I'm writing down lots of questions, and mainly I just want to ask you guys questions, and feel like I actually feel so engaged by the words that you've shared. So hopefully some of those will come up in our Q&A after this. I don't have that much to say. I have a little bit to say. Also, I should warn you that our childcare reality is not what I hoped it would be. And I didn't realize when I agreed to this day that our kids would not actually be in school, either in school or on online school. So it's possible that my 5-year-old may run in here and meet me sometime in the next 10 minutes, in which case we'll navigate that when it happens. I think I want to start off, Jonah, when I emailed him a couple days ago and said, okay, what exactly is the prompt? What do you want us to talk about specifically? He said, what's the link between Jewish spirituality and environmental activism? Or what is the way that one way to say is, well, how does your Judaism inform your approach to your environmental education and your environmental activism? And I feel like we have to start I like to start with grounding us in a reality that in the year 2021, even though there have been great signs of progress and hope in the realm of ecological sustainability, right? In 2020, 90% of the new electricity in the United States is going to come from renewable energy. Last year, 50% of the cars sold were electric in Norway, but still. And now we have a president who believes that the climate change isn't a hoax. And yet globally, we're still in the middle of, and will increasingly inhabit, and will watch unfold in our lifetimes, a kind of disaster that we have yet, I think, even me and maybe even Ellen, who've been thinking about this even longer than I have fully embraced in the deepest places of our hearts and souls. We're seeing glimpses of it with the pandemic, and we've seen glimpses of it in California with the fires. But we all know that these are just tastes of what's to come. So as we think about what we're talking about is the fundamental challenge of our planet's ability to support life on this planet. So then the question is, so what does Judaism do for us? What does Judaism have to offer? And I would say that for most of my teaching career and most of my life as a Jewish environmentalist, the pathway of learning, or the pathway of like, how do we create activists within the Jewish world? How is Judaism, how can the synthesis of Judaism and environmental inclinations inspire, enrich, deepen our lives, even as it motivates us to make more change in the world, has gone something like this. You take a human, whether it's a 5-year-old, a 12-year-old, or a 20-something, and you guide them through experiences that connect them to the natural world in ways that support them in falling in love with the natural world. The trees that make the air we breathe breathable, the rain that makes life, the creatures that inhabit this planet with us. So it's a backpacking trip in the Sierras or in the Berkshires. It's time on the farm at Adamah or urban Adamah. And it's our hope that in those moments of slowing down and connecting, something opens up. And of course, the kinds of connections that are made possible, Judaism supports those connections in myriad ways. I mean, Ellen waxed on about the beautiful ways in which Tu Bishvat can do that work for us, but it's everywhere in our tradition. In some ways, they form the structure of programs like Urban Adamah and Adamah and Teva, right? It's in almost every Jewish holiday: Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, Shabbat. It's in our rituals, it's in our blessings, it's in our prayers. And our work as educators is to help people make those connections real, tangible, and in their bodies by taking them outside to touch and feel and notice. And in that connection comes love of nature. And from love comes care. And from care comes activism. At least that's how I have been thinking about the theory of change in our work. Like, how do we move us along towards the kind of consciousness that it's going to take for the recreation of the world as we want it to be. And I still think this model is very useful, and it's a core part of what we do both at Adamah and at Urban Adamah. And over the last several years, the emphasis of my own teaching has really shifted. In large part because I believe that the environmental crisis, and now I feel like now I'm moving from Ellen to Ariel a little bit, right? If I understood what Ariel had to say, I think that's what's happening here, right? Because I believe that the environmental crisis is less of a symptom of our alienation from the natural world and more of a symptom of an alienation from ourselves. So what do I mean by that, right? I mean that much of the difficulty for me about modern life, materialism, hyper-individualism, the decline of community, reinforces in us false messages about who we are. And in some, those messages, I think, can be crystallized into some version of we are not enough and we don't have enough. Of course, modern society then offers us all sorts of ways that we can become enough that are actually self-reinforcing in a negative way. But I think the problem is that when we believe these messages about ourselves, it becomes much easier to adopt patterns of thinking and doing that are destructive to ourselves, to others, and to the natural world. And here is where I believe that Judaism really has something to offer us. Or I should say, has something to offer us that seems to be addressing more in a more laser-focused way the crux of the challenge. And I'll offer sort of just one little vignette about it, and then hopefully maybe in discussion we can talk about others. You know, in some ways, I think that Jewish tradition's most idealistic vision for us is, okay, warning, trigger alert here for all those who might be triggered by the word God. I know I sometimes am and have been, is to connect us to God. Now, what do I mean by God? Which God are we talking about? For me, for Urban Adamah, we're talking about the God of Yod He Vav He, our name for God, which is a combination of the words Haya, Hoveh, and Yihiyeh, the past, present, and future verb forms of the noun being. This God, a verb, not a noun, the God of the mystics and Chassidut, is simply the act of embracing unfolding presence in every moment, without resistance, without judgment. And in the embrace of presence, as J. Michelson writes in his extraordinary book, Everything is God, The Radical Path of Non-Dual Judaism, the side effect in that embrace, the side effect is love, which I believe is the root of healthy activism. So notice how I talked about how you can get there from engaging with nature. But more directly, I believe the path is love to activism. So nature is one way to get there, but there's all sorts of ways to get to love. And I believe that Judaism's greatest tool for helping us heal the biosphere is first and foremost the cultivation of presence, the side effect being love. So what does it look like at Urban Adamah? It means that the Jewish rituals of presence are elevated to the forefront of our practice. It means meditation in our prayer services. It means slow walks in the fields during Kabbalat Shabbat. It means blessings before we eat, filled with words and intentions that come straight from the heart, in addition to words that come from the page. And it means integrating self-reflection, sharing, silence in all aspects of life in our community. In Social Vision, the book, Michael Wexler cites Genesis 2:3 as the key source text for informing the Jewish vision of Tikkun Olam, healing the world. Kivo Shabbat mikol melachto asher bara Elohim la'asot. God abstained from all God's work that God created to do. So in the book, he talks about the weird framing of the word to do at the end of that. Right? Why does it say God abstained from all God's work that God created to do? It just should say, if it was sort of normal, it might just say God created. And he talks about, and if I remember it correctly, what he says is that the teaching around that is that it points to the fact that even though God was done creating, there was a whole bunch more creating that was still going to happen. And that was going to be on the shoulders of us humans to do. But I think that in linking ourselves to God as co-creators, we're not simply partners in output, right? It's not just like it was God's turn to create an output, and now it's our turn to create an output. I think, and Ariel, I'd be very curious if there's actually any support of this in actual Jewish text. This is just my own thinking from reading the text. As partners in creation, we're partners in the process. In other words, if we have an understanding of the divine in the world as a kind of unfolding presence, and it's through that unfolding presence that created the phenomenal world that we all now see, then our job is also to create from the place of presence, right? Another way of saying that might be, we are to let our beingness, our enoughness, our divine unfolding be the instrument of our doing, as opposed to letting our egos, our fears, or other stories about ourselves drive our doings. And when we do this, I actually think there is no longer an ecological crisis, because the love that manifests makes it impossible to destroy what gives us life and what we know is in fact us. On the gate at Urban Adamah, we spent a long time. We built this beautiful gate as the entrance of our farm, and we spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, what are the words that we want to put above the gate? Well, and there were some that said we should put the words, when God created the world, at the end, God said it was good, right? We want to say something about the goodness of the word. Someone else said we should use the midrash that says, when Adam and Eve when God finished his work, and when God created Adam, I'm paraphrasing here. This is not exactly the text, but there's a midrash that says something like, and God said, basically, don't screw up because no one is going to come after you, right? So and then there's all sorts of language, all sorts of Jewish text, environmental text we could have used. We could have something about Bal Tashchit, Sar Ba'alei Chaim, but instead we chose to use the phrase Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And I think it goes to our core understanding that the only way we are going to act towards others and to the natural world differently is if we know that we are enough and have enough. And where the muscle of self-love is so big that giving and receiving feels the same, because all it is love. Thanks.
Wow, thanks so much, Adam. That was beautiful. These were 4 really, really beautiful talks in a row, and I'm a little bit overwhelmed by how great they were. We have 3 minutes left of this official panel, so that's a lot to talk about in such a small amount of time. So before we open it up again, I just want to say we had a plan to, after 4:30, continue this room as kind of a space to schmooze, and we can let more people into this area. But if the panelists are open to it, no pressure, you can leave if you have to, because you only committed to 4:30, but we can continue this conversation for a few more minutes, and just because I feel like there's a little bit more to talk about. And then again at 5:30, we'll be having that another workshop about environmental Hasidism. And please join us again for tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, because we have a lot of great stuff coming down the line. But in the next few minutes, I just want to open it up to the panelists before any Q&A. If you want to respond to anything anyone else said, there were some direct questions asked. I know Adam asked Ariel a few questions, and I have a lot of questions, but I'll open it up to you guys first in case anyone wants to respond to something else someone said.
Adam, just in brief to your question, there's no end to really great Jewish texts on partnership and creation, and the invitation to be vessels and vehicles for that la'asot, that extra doing that we are commanded to take part in an active way. One of the great, perhaps most precise summaries of that is the Zohar is a great addition to the list of things that we all know from the Talmud, where it says, just as God visits the sick, so do we visit the sick, right, et cetera, et cetera. The Zohar says, Mahu borei olamot, afata borei olamot. Just as God creates worlds, so too we are commanded to create worlds. And that happens for us within this world.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Are there any other responses to each other's? And if not, I have a few things I wanted to connect of your talks, but if not, I want to hear from you guys first.
Prompt us, Jonah.
All right, well, I'll just say I found, I was taking notes while you guys were talking, and I found an interesting, because everyone's coming from some people from similar places, but everyone, their work right now is pretty different, is pretty different areas. So I wanted to just draw a connection here between Ellen's discussion of blessing the food with the production of the food that Adam and Janna are more involved in, and then Ariel's discussion of halacha and how that is the framework through which these blessings happen. You're only blessing through the structure of halacha. This is what you say to this one, this is what you say to this one. And so I guess I wanted to hear a conversation around, right, the process. We're always talking about food processes, so the process of production to actually putting it in your mouth, and how Judaism informs every single step of that, from the first planting to the blessing and eating. That's to everyone, and please jump in wherever you see fit. I can be more specific if that would be helpful. I guess I'm thinking specifically there, the framework of halacha specifically is not something that every Jewish person, not every Jewish farm is functioning through, but we're pulling from it. We're pulling what blessings to make on what vegetables, we're pulling what blessings to make on what fruits. And so I guess I'm wondering, specifically, the Rebbe is talking about using traditional Jewish value, traditional as in like, halacha tradition to inform this. And yet not every Jewish farmer and not every Jewish environmentalism organization is using that. And so I want to see how it can be extended, how it's not just non-traditional Jews or traditional Jews, but there are connections between those because we're pulling from the same streamlines of halacha and of tradition.
I'll just say something. I mean, I don't know if it's really to your point, but I feel like I'm operating in a little bit of a different place than for the last 10 years, which is about language and communicating the environmental message, and how I'm interested in not just religious Jews at all. I'm very interested in reaching across all kinds of divisions. So for me, I'm just looking at sort of Jewish ideas and the Jewish idea of blessing, and blessing as encapsulating love, and how all, that can be meaningful to all people. I guess, I live in a world where I know lots of people who aren't Jewish, don't have Jewish holidays, I just feel like so many people, like the whole New Age movement feels like it's so huge because people don't have their own holidays, there aren't ways to celebrate. And, I just feel like, actually we heard one of the panelists this morning, calling on indigenous traditions or whatever to get their spiritual notions there. And for me, I want to bring Jewish ideas into the marketplace of ideas, and not just because I really believe in them, and I feel like that. So like in academia, which is a lot of where I function, those ideas are not welcome. And I just feel like they're so needed. So I'm looking to try to bolster that and looking for colleagues to help with that. So anyway, it's not really to your point, but.
Oh, that was great. Thank you. Yeah. I saw some other people, if they wanted.
I hear in responding to the climate crisis, we hear this call for new stories a lot. We hear this call that we need a story to respond to this moment. And that's what I see at Adamah. I see these, and what I spoke about is, folks who are coming and seeking some kind of awakeness. And I think that blessings, like Ellen spoke about, and halacha, I think like the way that you're using the word and thinking about it, are those ways of opening our eyes. And I certainly experienced them through the act of farming, which was part of what I was getting at too, that for me, I don't know anything about generating energy, or I don't know particularly much about it. I know a lot about how to grow potatoes, but that doesn't mean that generating energy is less a part of the solution or the conundrum of our existence on Earth. It's just as much a part of it. It just isn't my particular window. And I walk through that window every time I figure out how to germinate a seed and get it to the point of harvest. And that's for me a window into what it means to sustain myself and my community. And really at its heart, a window into what is interconnected about the world. And so I think everyone needs those windows. And I think halacha provides that. I think blessings provide that. I think the act of engaging in the stuff of the world provide that.
Thank you. If there are no more responses, I see that Michael Wexler has one question.
Jonah,
unless,
can I respond also?
Yeah, please.
I think that one of the great arguments of the Mishnah is not as easily visible when we read just parts of it. The argument of the Mishnah is that there is nothing outside of the pale of halacha, that halacha is not a formalistic legal structure, and that when I have a question, the first thing I should do is say oy vey and run to the Shulchan Aruch and try and figure out what am I supposed to do by looking at this text. Halacha is a pathway of life. It's what we think of in terms of the norms and the nomos of a particular community. And the norms and the nomos of a particular community are not formalized and crystallized and encoded in books. They're lived by people. And they're lived by people in ways that have vast heterogeneous multiplicities built into them. And although law as a discourse is concerned with norms, it's also, as in the way that it's practiced, open to the constant reinvention and reinterpretation by the people who live it. This is one of those great misunderstandings, I think, about the way in which we've all been infected by a legal positivistic way of understanding halacha. And in that sense, there are all of these texts and all of these pathways that are available within the tradition as conversation partners and walking sticks along the paths of the farm and along the rows that we seek to till. And the scope and the depth of those traditions embed not only obligations, but they also carry with them stories and narratives if we learn how to listen to them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Our last question is from Michael Wexler, one of the authors of the book. And he put it here in the, I think if I click this, everyone can see it. Oh, no, went away. Oh, here it is. Okay. So he says, Adam, when is the TED Talk? Oh, okay. This is the question. Adam, he wants you to have a TED Talk. The question is, how can the average person, Jewish or not, who is overwhelmed or constrained by the exigencies of regular life, who are not on this cutting edge that we inhabit, practice spiritual ecology on a daily level in a way that is sacred and not simply beyond throwing the soda can in the right container? Or is the answer sacralizing those simple actions as well? It was a good question, Michael.
So one of the most important things that we do.
Can you lean a little bit closer again, Adam?
One of the most important things that we do at Urban Adamah with our fellows is that we structure their lives so that they are much slower than their lives outside of the fellowship. We meditate every morning for an hour. There's spaciousness around meals. So I think the first step in developing, I mean, you called it spiritual ecology, and I will call it the first step towards growing our muscle of self-love and self-awareness is slowing down. Most of us, or I would say many humans, use speed to distract us from seeing what is there but what's difficult, those hard feelings. So my first step would be, I don't know, meditate for 15 minutes a day. Integrate meditation as part of your shacharit. And don't just do it on your own. Find a meditation teacher. And that meditation teacher may or may not be within the Jewish community. Find someone who's been meditating for 20 years, either inside or outside. Mindfulness is not Buddhist. Mindfulness is universal. But if the person in your community who understands mindfulness meditations happens to be a Buddhist, see if you can learn from that person how you can use the tool of mindfulness to grow your own internal awareness and to grow your heart through the practice of presence. So I don't know if this is a recommendation. I'm telling you how we think about doing it with the fellows is that we start by integrating small steps and practices into their lives that helps them slow down, notice, and connect to themselves and connect to others. And in that slowing and in that connection, a new version of themselves emerges. And that's the power of the program. But it's, right now, I left Urban Adamah. I'm no longer the executive director. I left in January. And in some ways, I've been spending my COVID months both parenting and slowing down. And so I'm sort of taking what I've been teaching at Urban Adamah, and before that Adamah for all these years, and applying it to my own life because I desperately need it. I've been moving so fast. And not everybody has the luxury to be meditating as many hours a day as I get to meditate right now. But when I started out, it was a lot less. So I would say start small, but think about what for me, the recommended approach would be, how can you slow down and help yourself notice? And I'll leave it at that.
If there are any other suggestions we have to slow down and stop now. But if there are any other quick suggestions, I would love to hear.
I just want to say that I think that there's so many ways to do something similar to achieve the same kind of space that Adam's talking about. For example, and I think it really helps to get yourself in some kind of like class or whatever, just to afford yourself that time. Right now, I'm taking a class with Victoria Hanna. And if you don't know who she is, you should Google her. She's unbelievable. And the work that she does that's in voice, that's really about voice and the letters, she's in Jerusalem, is another way to get to the same place that I feel like Adam's talking about, and to connect with oneself. As it's kind of a simultaneous thing, right? The deeper you're connecting inside of yourself, the more opportunity to connect to the whole natural world.
And I would offer quickly also the idea of really learning about your place. I think that there's a spiritual gnawing that happens on all of us of the obscuredness of what the sources of our lives are. What's the sources of our food? What are the sources of our comforts and our care? And I think that being so invisible and externalized, and as we know, there's so much exploitation that happens in the invisible space between what sustains us and what and ourselves. I think that learning, digging up a little soil somewhere nearby, and is it red? Is it gritty? Is it clay? Where does your power come from? What watershed are you on? I think those questions lead to spiritual movement that is also really profound.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, we have to close out now. This was an amazing panel. Thank you so much, and everyone for joining us. We are done for today of the Social Vision Conference. Please join us again tomorrow at, I believe, 11 a.m. Let me make certain of that. At 10 a.m. tomorrow. And we have panels at 10, 1, and 2 on diversity, race, and Hasidic feminism. So please join us for those. And as well for Wednesday, Thursday, and the following Monday. Thank you guys so much, the panelists who are here right now. We can stop live streaming to Facebook now.